Hello, I'm Mark Price. I'd like to talk to you today about daring to break the rules. There was a young girl that went to her mother one day and said, Mom, I really want to know, where do people come from? And so her mother sat her down and said, well, God created man and woman had babies, and then their babies grew up, and then they had babies. And the little girl said, thank you, Mommy. And then later that day she went to her father and she said, Daddy, where do people come from? And her father sat her down, looked at her and said, well, first there were monkeys, and then the monkeys evolved into other creatures and finally into human beings. And the little girl said, thank you, Daddy. And she was confused, scratched her head, went back to her mother and said, I'm confused, Mommy. You told me that God created man and woman and that started the whole human race. Daddy tells me we came from monkeys. And the mother looked at her and said, oh, well, I told you about my side of the family. He was telling you about his. I love that one. The reading from today is from the Acts of the Apostles. And I'm not going to read it, but you see the chapter and verse below, and I encourage you to read it. It's a long verse, but it's worth reading. It's a story today of Paul and Barnabas working with the church of Antioch. They're trying to bring people to faith there in and around the area of Antioch. And many people are coming to faith, and many of them are not Jewish people, but they're Gentiles or pagans who want to follow this one God, but they had a problem. They did not want to follow all the Jewish rules. You see, the rules for the early church of Christ, the way, was that you could be baptized into Jesus, you could be baptized into the church, but you had to commit to follow the Jewish rules, the 600 plus rules that the Jewish people had, one of which was circumcision. And these Gentiles, these pagans, did not want to become circumcised. They did not think that was a rule that they had to follow. And Paul agreed with them and was baptizing these pagans, these Gentiles, into the church of Jesus without having been circumcised and without having to be circumcised. Well, the church in Jerusalem heard about it. Paul and Barnabas had to go back and meet with them, and by the end of the meeting, the church agreed that they would not be subject to the circumcision rule. So Paul and Barnabas are back in Antioch, and they're explaining this to all the people, that you can come to Jesus, be baptized in Jesus, follow Jesus, the Holy Spirit will come into you, and you will not be subject to that law. Now, the Jewish people believe you break one law, you break all of the laws. Paul believed that Jesus died on that cross for everybody. And when he was baptizing them, he was seeing in their heart and in their spirit people who had accepted Christ. And so he was breaking the rules until he got the rule changed. So I suggest to you that sometimes it's good to dare to break the rules. I remember a moment that played a major role in my walk of faith. I was 11 years old, raised Catholic, and I had a good friend in school, and he died in a car accident. And his mother came to me and asked if, as his good friend, if I would say some things at his funeral. And I said, yes, but I have to ask my mom and dad. Well, that afternoon, I told my mom and dad that I was asked to speak, and my mom said, you can't do it. And I said, why not? She said, because he's Methodist. And I said, what difference does that make? She says, we're Catholic, he's Methodist. I said, you tell me and raise me to believe there's one God. What difference does it make? And she said, well, it's a rule in our church that you cannot go into another faith's church. In fact, there was a joke at the time that we couldn't even walk on the sidewalk in front of another church for fear you might get sucked in. But my parents were phenomenal parents, and the reason I'm still in faith today is, as I've said before, due in great part to the parents that I had. My mom said, let's go and talk to the pastor. So my mom and dad and I, we went to our local church, St. John of the Cross, sat down with the pastor, Monsignor McDonough. We explained the situation. He looked at us, Monsignor McDonough, scary guy. I mean, I think he probably looked in the mirror scared himself, but a good pastor, I'm told. He said, no, you can't do it. You can't go speak at the funeral. It's against the rules. And I started to argue with them, saying there's one God, and my mother sort of nudged me under the table. Well, as we're leaving, I'm mad, I'm not happy. We get into the car, my parents' 1963 red Chevy Nomad station wagon. My dad's driving, my mom's in the other seat, and I'm in the back, kind of pouting a little bit. And my mother turned around and she said, "We're going to take you to the funeral." You see, my mother knew, and my mother taught me, my parents taught me, that it's okay to break rules if you're breaking them for the right reason. You have to know the rule, understand the rule, and then have a darn good reason for breaking it. And it's always a good reason when you're putting people first, the welfare of people first, the needs of people first. Paul knew it way back when. The early church came around to knowing it, and my mother and father knew it and taught it to me. So dare in your life to break the rules. This is Mark Price. Thanks for listening.